Welcome, volunteers. We are so grateful for God calling you to serve with Johnny and Friends. Our ministry is growing through faithful people like you who put the love of Christ into practice by assisting children and families who live with disabilities. I know that God will use your giftings and heart in powerful ways as you demonstrate His love to families living with disability. As a Johnny and Friends volunteer, you have a critical part to play in ensuring that each attendee feels safe throughout their time with us. Protecting the safety and dignity of every participant and volunteer is a top priority, never to be compromised. And so, to maintain the highest possible standard of care and vigilance, we're providing this training, covering the subject of child abuse recognition and reporting. This training is mandatory for all adult volunteers ages 18 and up who will serve with Johnny and Friends. Through this training, you'll be prepared to recognize and respond to any instance of child abuse that you might encounter. And the same guidelines and requirements apply when caring for vulnerable adults and adults with disabilities. Our Johnny and Friends team wants you to know how much we value you and the families and children we serve together. While topics like child abuse and abuse of adults with disabilities are upsetting to discuss, and we pray that such situations never arise, especially in this Christian environment, it is our responsibility to equip you through this safe, honest, and accessible conversation. So thank you again for serving with Johnny and Friends and for taking time to learn how to best protect and care for the people we serve. In this training session, you will learn about the history of child abuse and neglect reporting laws and important prevention facts, why we report and how to report, and recognizing and preventing abuse and neglect. How do we define child abuse and neglect? Child abuse and neglect is any intentional act or failure to act that injures a child. First, let's understand the history of reporting laws in the United States. The Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, known as CAPTA, was passed in 1974. CAPTA has been amended several times since its inception. This federal law requires that mandated reporters report known or suspected child abuse and neglect. CAPTA also establishes minimum standards for state-mandated reporter laws. Many states have created their own laws with higher standards of care requirements than the federal standards. Originally, mandated reporter laws just applied to physicians who seemed to be in a unique occupation to suspect or witness the evidence of child abuse and neglect. Over time, it became evident that multiple professions and people in a variety of roles were in these same unique positions to see and report child abuse and neglect. Some states have long lists of mandated reporters by occupation or profession, while many states have made laws that all persons are mandated reporters. All 50 states and the District of Columbia have laws that provide immunity from civil or criminal liability for people who make good faith reports of child abuse or neglect. This protection includes both mandated and voluntary reporters. As a Johnny and Friends volunteer, you must follow the laws of the state that you serve in. However, Johnny and Friends has established this policy of best practice. If you suspect child abuse or neglect, you must immediately report it to Johnny and Friends leadership. Johnny and Friends will report it directly to Child Protective Services with you. If you report and you're wrong, it might be inconvenient for the people involved. But if you don't report and you're wrong not to report, a child will continue to be abused and neglected. The best practice is to err on the side of reporting rather than not reporting. Let's review what you've learned. Is there a federal law that governs child abuse and neglect reporting? A. Yes, it's called the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA. B. It's called Capture the Assailants, or CAPTA. C. It's called Child Abuse Perpetrators and Their Arrests, CAPTA. And D, no, only the states have individual laws. The correct answer is A. There is a federal law that governs child abuse and neglect reporting. It's called the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA. Have some states created their own laws with higher standards of care? A, no. B, yes. The answer is B. Yes, some individual states have created their own laws with higher standards of care. Does Johnny and Friends have a policy that all child abuse and neglect must be reported to the organization immediately upon suspicion? A, no. B, yes, you must report it within 3 weeks of suspicion. C, yes, any suspected child abuse and neglect must be immediately reported to Johnny and Friends leadership. D, yes, but you only must report abuse if it's extremely bad. The answer is C. Yes, Johnny and Friends has a policy that all child abuse and neglect must be reported to the organization immediately upon suspicion. Next, we're going to look at exactly what is meant by the terms child abuse and child neglect. Child abuse occurs due to harmful action. Child neglect occurs due to harmful inaction. Children with disabilities are nearly 4 times more likely to be physically abused or neglected, and more than 3 times more likely to be sexually abused when compared to children without disabilities. These heartbreaking statistics should call us to vigilance and action. This is why Johnny and Friends is committed to protecting members of the disability community who trust us to serve them well. Sadly, as noted by the Centers for Disease Control, children with disabilities are more likely to be abused because caring for children with disabilities may be more stressful and create higher care demands on parents and caregivers. Children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or other behavioral challenges may be more likely to experience physical abuse because parents can become frustrated by the child's difficult behavior and respond harshly. Children who are less able to do things independently rely more on adults for their care. And these children may be more likely to be sexually abused or neglected by adults. Finally, abusers may take advantage of children who have problems speaking, hearing, or who don't understand social situations very well. These children may be more likely to experience sexual abuse. Here are some additional key things that you need to be made aware of. Many children wait to report or never report child sexual abuse. About 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys in the United States experience child sexual abuse. 91% of victims are abused by someone they know and trust. 60% of child abusers are acquaintances, teachers, neighbors, community leaders. Lastly, only 10% of child abusers are unknown to the children they abuse. Tragically, child abuse and neglect are all too common, and they occur across all socioeconomic levels, religions, education levels, and ethnic groups. Child abuse is an equal opportunity offender. Again, these facts and statistics we've looked at together are heartbreaking. And as followers of Christ, this suffering we see should galvanize us to the highest level of vigilance as we protect the people we serve. So now let's review what you've learned with some questions. If a child grows up in a Christian home, they are less likely to suffer child abuse and neglect. A, true. B, false. The answer is false. If a child grows up in a Christian home, they are not less likely to suffer child abuse and neglect. Child abuse is an equal opportunity offender. Most children are abused by strangers. A, true. B, false. The answer is false. Most children who experience abuse suffer at the hands of someone they know and trust. Are children with disabilities more likely to be abused? A, no, children with disabilities have so much extra care that they could never be abused. B, no, children with disabilities are never abused. C, yes, children with disabilities are more likely to be abused. D, children with disabilities are no more likely to be abused than a child that does not have a disability. The answer is C, yes, children with disabilities are more likely to be abused. Now that we know the definition of child abuse and neglect and just how prevalent it is, let's look at how each of us can do our part to help prevent it. To do this, we turn to the subject of reporting. The first step in preventing child abuse and neglect is training, like you are doing today. The second step in preventing child abuse and neglect is to report it. The sooner the intervention, the more likely a child will stop suffering. If you report, it's important to know some basic facts. First, a child isn't automatically taken from their home and placed in foster care. Second, Child Protective Services usually does a type of family needs assessment and tries to support the family with resources including food, shelter, classes, and more. Third, if a child is in immediate danger, they may be removed from their home to protect them. And fourth, your identity will be kept confidential to the extent provided by the law, but will be shared with investigating agencies, including Child Protective Services and law enforcement. So once again, the primary intent of reporting child abuse is to protect the child. It also provides an opportunity to potentially protect other children. A report may bring resources to an abuser and may result in an outcome that changes the abuser's future behavior. Reporting is a potential catalyst for change in the home and may mitigate abuse. Prevention is comprised of policy, training, reporting, and behaviors by caregivers to create an environment that reduces the risk of abuse occurring. Johnny and Friends is committed to maintaining the standard of care for children and adults with disabilities that we serve, and this starts with reporting. Keep in mind that reporting may stop or prevent additional adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences are trauma that a child suffers or is exposed to prior to the age of 18. Adverse childhood experiences can include recurring physical, sexual, or emotional abuse in the home, alcohol or drug abuse in the home, a household member being incarcerated, or witnessing domestic violence. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the first adverse childhood experience study was conducted by Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. This study is still used today to predict the effects of adverse childhood experiences or childhood trauma. 17,000 participants were asked about their experiences with childhood maltreatment. This study found a direct link between childhood trauma and adult onset of chronic disease, incarceration, and other adverse results like employment challenges. Basically, the more adverse childhood experiences a child endured, the higher the likelihood of chronic disease the person would have in adulthood. Let's take a minute to review what you have learned by asking a few more questions. Is a child always immediately removed from their home if a report of child abuse and neglect is made? A, yes, children are immediately removed from their homes and they are immediately placed in foster care. B, no, a child is never removed from their home. C, a child is never automatically removed from their home, but could be if they are in immediate danger. D, only children 0 to 5 years of age can be removed from their homes. The answer is C. If a report of child abuse and neglect is made, a child is only automatically removed from their home if he or she is found to be in immediate danger. What is the primary purpose of reporting? A, the primary purpose of reporting is to provide help to the suspected abuser. B, the primary purpose of reporting is to get resources for the family. C, the primary purpose of reporting is to get the suspect arrested. Or D, the primary purpose of reporting is to protect the child, but other resources may be provided to the family if Child Protective Services deems it necessary. The answer is D. The primary purpose of reporting suspected child abuse and neglect is to protect the child, but other resources may be provided to the family if Child Protective Services deems it necessary. Prevention is comprised of what components? A. Prevention is composed of good communication, investigating reports, and parental advice. B. Prevention is composed of leaving a child and a volunteer alone for long periods of time, forcing the child to talk to you and making reports. C. There is no way to prevent child abuse and neglect. And D. Prevention is comprised of policy, training, reporting, and behaviors by caregivers to create an environment that reduces the risk of abuse occurring. The answer is D. Prevention is comprised of policy, training, reporting, and behaviors by caregivers to create an environment that reduces the risk of abuse occurring. Which of the following are adverse childhood experiences? A. A family being heavily involved in the church. B. A family makes their child eat non-GMO and organic food. C. A family makes their child shower and brush their teeth every night. And D. A family locks their children in the basement every day after school until the next morning so they don't have to deal with them. The answer is D. One example of an adverse childhood experience would be if a family were to lock their children in the basement in order to avoid having to deal with them.
Now we are going to dig deeper into the subject of reporting. Let's talk about who should report suspected child abuse and when reports should be made.
Child Protective Services?
I need to make a report.
Although each state has different rules regarding who is a mandated reporter and who is a permissible voluntary reporter, Johnny and Friends requires all suspected child abuse and neglect to be reported. All volunteers should immediately report known or suspected child abuse or neglect to Johnny and Friends leadership. In Nevada, Washington, North Carolina, Indiana, and Missouri, volunteers must report directly to Child Protective Services or an equivalent agency and to Johnny and Friends leadership. It is a policy of Johnny and Friends that all reports of suspected child abuse and neglect must be reported to the organization. Reporting can be difficult, especially when taking disability into the equation. Sometimes the signs, symptoms, actions, and behaviors of those we serve can mimic signs of abuse. It is imperative that we look at the totality of circumstances in each situation. Here is a list of just some of the disorders that can mimic signs of abuse. Physical disorders like collagen disorders, heritable disorders, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, vessel and stroma fragility, skin injuries like bed sores, thrombocytopenia, or bleeding disorders, all can cause a look of injury or abuse. In addition, some behavioral disorders can cause a child to act out in ways we might expect from someone who has experienced abuse. I'm talking about disorders such as ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, CD, conduct disorders, ADD, attention deficit disorders, or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In other cases, learning and development disorders may lead to behaviors that seem to suggest that abuse has taken place. For example, delayed development may lead to problematic sexual behaviors. Hypersexual, repetitive, or echolalic language can be a symptom of autism spectrum disorders. Social skills difficulties may be difficult to interpret. When in doubt about whether or not you are recognizing signs of abuse, come to your Johnny and Friends leadership. Johnny and Friends gathers information about disabilities and conditions that our participants live with. In cases where signs of abuse are suspected, Johnny and Friends staff and volunteers are advised to observe the totality of the circumstances. Even if a child's symptoms or behaviors might be explained by their disability or condition, you may still have a reason to suspect abuse or neglect. In such cases, you are required to report the potential abuse. Next, we will talk about reasonable suspicion. What is reasonable suspicion? For our purposes, reasonable suspicion can be defined as suspicion that arises to a reasonable person based upon facts and/or observations that child abuse or neglect might have taken place. Reasonable suspicion can, but must not only arise based upon a particular position held, for example, that of a doctor or a pastor, or training and experience in recognizing signs of abuse. What's most important for you to know is this: if you suspect child abuse and view your suspicion as reasonable, you must report it. When you have a reasonable suspicion that a child is a victim of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse or neglect, you must report it. You do not need to have proof or determine if it really happened. You should never investigate your suspicions. Leave the investigation to the proper authorities. You do not need direct disclosure. If you need clarifying information, you may ask minimal, non-leading questions to gather information. Here are some examples.
Did your dad kick you? How did you hurt your leg?
My dad.
Did your babysitter slap you? How did you get that bruise on your face?
My babysitter.
What did your parents do to your foot? Hold it in boiling water? How did you get that burn on your foot?
Mommy said I deserved it.
It's important for you to know that some cases call for reporting even in the absence of reasonable suspicion as we have defined it so far. Some specific circumstances that must be reported and do not need reasonable suspicion are direct disclosure by a child, anyone 14 years or older who discloses they have abused another child, if you witness abuse with your own eyes, or if you come across images or videos of a child being abused. Of course, we hope that you never encounter circumstances like these, but if you do, by reporting properly, you can play a critical role in protecting an abused child or vulnerable adult living with a disability. Let's pause to review what you have learned in this section. Here are a few questions. What is the definition of reasonable suspicion? A. Talking to other people to get a consensus before you formulate a suspicion. B. Calling a family member of the child to confirm your suspicion to make it reasonable. C. If you think a child is abused, thinking about it for several weeks to make sure you still have a suspicion is a definition of reasonable suspicion. Or D. Reasonable suspicion means a person entertains a suspicion of child abuse or neglect based upon facts that could cause a reasonable person in a like position, drawing when appropriate, on his or her training and experience to suspect child abuse or neglect. In other words, if you suspect it, if you think it, you have formulated a reasonable suspicion. You should report it. The answer is D. Reasonable suspicion arises when a person suspects child abuse or neglect based upon facts that could cause a reasonable person in a like position, drawing when appropriate on his or her training and experience, to suspect child abuse or neglect. In other words, if you find yourself suspecting child abuse based upon your observations, you should report it. True or false? You should always thoroughly investigate your suspicion of child abuse and neglect. The answer is B. False. You should never investigate suspected child abuse. You should leave the investigation to the authorities. Which of the following is an example of how to ask a minimal non-leading question to get clarifying information? A. Your father keeps hitting you in the stomach, right? B. Did your mother push you down the stairs to break your arm? C. How did you hurt your leg? Or D. Did your mom or dad cause that injury? The answer is C. The example of how to ask a minimal non-leading question to get clarifying information is, how did you hurt your leg? Can some disabilities, behaviors, and conditions mimic signs of abuse? A. No, never. Or B. Yes, this is why we consider what we know about the child's disability and look at the totality of circumstances. The answer is B. Yes, some disabilities, behaviors, and conditions can mimic signs of abuse, and this is why we consider what we know about the child's disability and look at the totality of the circumstances. If you believe a child with a disability is being abused or neglected, must you report it? A. Yes, or B. No. The correct answer is A. Yes, if you believe a child with a disability is being abused or neglected, you must report it. Now that we know why and how to report child abuse, we are going to talk about signs that abuse or neglect may be occurring and how to recognize them. We know that these topics are upsetting and unpleasant, but it's critically important to be direct and specific when discussing the signs of abuse and neglect. Let's begin with the signs of physical abuse. Bruises. This child has multiple bruises all over his body in various stages of healing. One could reasonably suspect that this is due to child abuse. Questionable lacerations, cuts, and/or scratches. Patterns of marks on the skin. It appears that this child may have been burnt with a cigarette lighter. Straight line lacerations. This might have been caused by a strap or tool. Marks around wrists or ankles. This child may have had his wrists restrained. Injuries that have improbable explanations.
I fell out of bed.
It is unlikely all these injuries were caused by rolling off a bed. Questionable burns. A sock burn is likely an intentional act created by holding the foot in scalding water. Cigarette burns or cigarette lighter burns. It is likely these burns were intentionally inflicted. Cigarette burns are round in nature, and cigarette lighter burns are spiral in nature. And finally, bite marks. This is a human bite mark. Again, we know that these images can be upsetting and disturbing, but this helps us understand the signs of physical abuse. Beyond physical abuse, we also need to be aware of sexual abuse. What are some warning signs that sexual abuse might have occurred? Here are some signs of sexual abuse. Using age-inappropriate terminology, having advanced sexual knowledge that is not age-appropriate, unusual preoccupation with genitalia, sexually abusing other children or adults, and/or extreme fear of one gender over the other. When it comes to sexual abuse, let's remember that it is important to consider the totality of the circumstances. Some disabilities and conditions may cause symptoms and/or behaviors that resemble signs of abuse or neglect. Still, if reasonable suspicion of abuse arises, you must report.
The signs of sexual abuse are not always obvious. And while we hope it never affects someone we know, we have a responsibility to protect those God has placed in our care and take action if we have suspicion of abuse. All too often, sexual abuse is committed by someone close, trusted, and respected. Since abuse may happen outside the spaces where we interact with someone, we must pay attention to the bigger picture. For instance, someone who used to be outgoing may begin to isolate and withdraw. A child may struggle with behaviors they didn't experience before, like aggression, avoiding eating, not sleeping, or wetting the bed. Recognizing the signs can be even harder in our friends with disabilities. They may face challenges expressing that they need help. not recognize certain behaviors as inappropriate, or depend on someone who's taking advantage of them for personal care. By knowing what to look for, we can help protect those who are most vulnerable and connect them with the support they need. If you have reasonable suspicion of abuse, report it to a Johnny and Friends staff member or volunteer leader. Together, we can safeguard all those in our care.
Let's take another moment to review what we have learned with some questions. For these questions, listen to the circumstance described. Then answer whether it would be appropriate to report or not report suspected abuse. Report or don't report. A child comes to you with a bruise on their face. The parent and child tell you that the child recently fell out of their wheelchair and due to limited use of their arms and hands, sustained an injury to their face. The parents show you the doctor's report, which describes the treatment of applying ointment and changing the bandage daily. A. Report. There is nothing to substantiate the injury was not abuse. B. Don't report. There is a probable explanation of the injury with doctor's orders. The answer here is B. You would not report here as the explanation of the injury and doctor's orders seem to be probable. Report or don't report. A child with behavioral issues arrives with 2 broken arms, a broken leg, and abrasions all over his body. The child explains that he was walking on the grass in his backyard and tripped and fell. A. Report. There is nothing to substantiate that the injury was not abuse, and the explanation is improbable. B. Don't report. There is a probable explanation of the injury. The answer here is A. You would report. In this case, there is nothing to substantiate that the injuries described were not caused by abuse, and the explanation given is improbable. Report or don't report. A child is playing on the swings when you notice 6 diagonal lacerations on her thighs and covering both legs. You ask her what happened, and she says she fell off her bike. A. Report. There is nothing to substantiate that the injury was not abuse, and the explanation is improbable. B. Don't report. There is a probable explanation of the injury with doctor's orders. Again, the answer is A. You would report suspected abuse. The explanation of the injury described is improbable, and there is no evidence to substantiate that the injuries did not result from abuse. Report or don't report. A 14-year-old child tells you that they have been forced to have inappropriate relations with their father. A. Report. A direct disclosure does not need reasonable suspicion and must be reported. B. Don't report. The correct answer is A. A direct disclosure of abuse must be reported, whether or not there is any additional basis for reasonable suspicion. Report or don't report. A 12-year-old child tells you her caregiver has been touching her down there. A. Report. A direct disclosure does not need reasonable suspicion. Or B. Don't report yet. Ask minimal non-leading clarifying questions to find out what down there means. The answer here is don't report yet. In this case, you would want to ask a minimal, non-leading question to clarify what the child means by down there. Thank you for taking this time and turning your attention to this difficult subject matter. We are grateful for your dedication to ensure the safety of the children and vulnerable adults in our care.
In addition to physical and sexual abuse, it is important that we understand emotional abuse. Speaking about emotional abuse, we are referring to behavior, speech, or actions by parents, caregivers, and other significant figures in a child's life that has a negative impact on a child. Emotional abuse is not as clearly defined as other forms of abuse and is often reported along with other types of abuse. You may witness emotional abuse of a child by a parent or caregiver in a variety of scenarios. For instance, telling a child they are worthless or unwanted. Isolation, intimidation, or humiliation of a child. A child witnessing domestic violence. Accusing, blaming, or insulting a child. Forbidding play. Encouraging misbehavior. Engaging a child in criminal acts. Or using extended periods of isolation to control or discipline a child. Sometimes a child who has suffered from emotional abuse will exhibit signs such as unusual bedwetting or soiling, significant sadness, withdrawal, or severe anxiety. While signs of emotional abuse can often be attributed to a range of other causes, including certain disabilities, suspicion of emotional abuse should not be dismissed. In these cases, it is important to remember to look at the totality of the circumstances. Take a look at this video.
Words can hurt. And when they're used to manipulate, belittle, or control, the wounds can last a lifetime. But we can do something to protect others from emotional and verbal abuse. So, what are some of the signs? We all lose our temper at times. But if a parent, caregiver, authority figure, or someone else frequently overreacts toward another person, especially with hurtful words, they may be engaging in abuse. Emotional and verbal abuse can also go hand in hand with other forms of abuse. If you notice signs of physical or sexual abuse, emotional harm may also be occurring. Some signs are more subtle, like withholding affection or using silence to manipulate. No matter what form it comes in, emotional and verbal abuse does hurt, and it can bring shame and deeply wound someone's self-worth and identity. But you can help. If you suspect abuse, report it to a Johnny and Friends staff member or a volunteer leader. Thank you for protecting and caring for the families God has led to Johnny and Friends.
Now let's review what we have learned. Which statement best describes emotional abuse? A. Emotional abuse is the easiest form of abuse to spot. B. Emotional abuse involves a parent denying a child a fourth serving of dessert. C. Emotional abuse is not as clearly defined as other forms of abuse and is most often reported along with other types of abuse. Or D. Emotional abuse doesn't exist. The answer is C. Emotional abuse is not as clearly defined as other forms of abuse and is most often reported along with other types of abuse. Now that we've looked at the various types of abuse we need to be aware of, we need to turn to the subject of neglect. To begin with, what kinds of signs may indicate that a child or vulnerable adult is suffering from neglect? First, a neglected child or vulnerable adult may be dressed in inadequate or inappropriate clothing for the weather. Extremely poor hygiene can indicate neglect, unwashed hair, extreme body odor, not bathing or brushing teeth. Insufficient clean clothes can also be a sign. A person wearing tattered clothing, for instance, may be a cause for concern. Indications that a person is living in unsanitary or hazardous conditions. Frequent hunger, thirst, or malnourishment. Abandonment. For instance, a child or vulnerable adult being left without proper supervision. Inappropriate caregiving arrangements. For instance, if a child is being cared for by someone too young or otherwise lacking competence to provide proper care. Once again, let's review what you have just learned. Which statements best describe child neglect? A. A child dressed in only a t-shirt when it is raining. B. A child living in a small motel room with 12 other people who don't have any food. C. A 14-year-old girl who tells you her parents won't buy her the newest iPhone. Or D. A and B. The answer is D. Both A and B describe cases of potential neglect. A child dressed in only a t-shirt when it is raining. And B, a child living in a small hotel room with 12 other people who don't have any food. Throughout this training, we have discussed upsetting scenarios, statistics, and images in order to understand child abuse and neglect. And as you know, the goal of this training is to equip you to make the difference, to protect and defend children and vulnerable adults, preventing abuse and neglect from taking place. So let's talk about prevention once more. Preventing child abuse and neglect requires a combination of policy, training, reporting, and behaviors by caregivers to create an environment that reduces the risk of abuse occurring. To recap some of what we have learned, Johnny and Friends has a policy that all suspected child abuse and neglect must be reported to the organization. In some states, child abuse and neglect must be reported to the organization and directly to Child Protective Services. And of course, Johnny and Friends is committed to raising the standard of care by providing all volunteers with regular training. Alongside these key points, let's talk about specific guidance for you as a volunteer. When you volunteer with Johnny and Friends, keep in mind the guidelines for conduct and behavior that will reduce the risk of abuse occurring. For example, always keep your attention on the children you are supervising. Johnny and Friends employs the 2-adult rule. The 2-adult rule requires that 2 unrelated adults be present at every function and in any room, building, or other enclosed area during all activities involving children, youth, or vulnerable adults. Manage your stress. If you sense you are tired or getting frustrated, ask for help or an alternative volunteer to step in for a time. Adhere to the swimsuit rule. Except as necessary to assist with toileting, never touch a child anywhere a swimsuit would cover. Reinforce the swimsuit rule to children. No one should touch them anywhere a swimsuit would cover. Remind children to alert a volunteer if they feel unsafe or uncomfortable or when rules have been broken. Take seriously all reports of abuse and neglect. If you ever see another adult inappropriately interacting with or touching a child, report it to Johnny and Friends leadership, and depending on the state where you are serving, directly to Child Protective Services. Do not contact a minor on any personal form of communication before, during, or after the event. And while volunteering, always keep language modest and age appropriate. Finally, let's talk about the specific toileting and bathroom assistance policy that Johnny and Friends has developed. This policy is in place to protect both the persons in need of assistance and the volunteers who provide assistance. Here are the key points. Children and vulnerable adults may only go to the restroom with adult youth volunteers or adults outside their family. If 2 volunteers are present and one of the 2 volunteers is at least 18 years old, do not linger in bathrooms or changing areas. If a child or vulnerable adult does not require toileting assistance, volunteers should stay outside of the restroom and utilize verbal supervision. Diaper changing or toileting that requires assistance will ideally be provided by the participant's parent or caregiver. In the event that a parent or caregiver is not available, a volunteer may change the individual's diaper or assist with toileting as long as the volunteer is 16 or older and another volunteer aged 18 or older is present. Diaper changing and toileting assistance should occur only in bathrooms or designated changing areas. If a volunteer is uncomfortable with assisting with diaper changing or toileting, they are not to be expected to help in this way. And finally, consult Johnny and Friends leadership with any questions or concerns about toileting or diaper changing needs. Now let's do a final review of what you have learned. Child abuse and neglect is any intentional act that harms a child or failure to act that harms a child. And the same principle applies for adults with disabilities. If you suspect child abuse or neglect of a person with a disability, you must report it. Reporting can be a catalyst to protect the child and bring change to their environment. Consider the total circumstances regarding a child with a disability and your suspicion. Never be alone with a child. Always maintain proper adult-child ratios. Always use appropriate talk and touch with children. Prevention is comprised of policy, training, reporting, and behaviors by caregivers to create an environment that reduces the risk of abuse occurring. Thank you once again for your commitment to upholding safety and prevention measures. If you have any questions, please contact your Johnny and Friends leadership. We pray that you'll have a blessed and joyful time serving with Johnny and Friends.